The horsehair plume on Jaime Lannister's helm gleamed as if gilded by the afternoon sun, though the street was foul with dust and fishmonger brine and the sweat of men who had been waiting too long for trouble. He came like a bright coin tossed into a mud puddle, and the men behind him wore the red of Casterly Rock and the hard eyes of Sellswords, who had never had to sell their swords because a lion kept them fed. Eddard Stark reined in, the cobbles uneven beneath his horse's iron shoes, and Jory Castle took 2 steps closer to his lord's stirrup, hand on hilt, mouth a thin line under his mustache. The smell of the city was all onion and tar and the tide. Above them, gulls pivoted like scraps of parchment in the wind. "Lord Stark," Jaime said, and unlatched his helm as if it weighed nothing. "I hear your lady wife made herself industrious." "She took a man to answer for a wrong," Ned said. He kept his voice even. The weight of the heat lay across his shoulders like a cloak from Dorne. "You know the wrong. I know my brother was carried off by a pack of Tully men as though he were stolen cheese." Jaime's smile was polite enough to be insult. "Return him, and I will forgive you your discourtesy." Ned could taste iron though his mouth was not bleeding. Behind him, his men shifted as the Lannister guards fanned into a crescent, hemming them near a shuttered wine sink whose sign creaked on a cracked peg. No breeze came down the alley. The only movement was the small tremor in the horse under him, the twitch of a fly at its flank. He thought of Catelyn, the way her hands trembled when she was braver than she let on. He thought of the boy pushed from the tower at Winterfell and of blue lips and broken things. He thought of how the gods judged men, slowly and without noise and in their own time. "You want my lady's guest? Take it up with the king," Ned said. "You do not lay ambushes in the streets of his city." "Ambushes?" Jaime lifted a brow and glanced over the red cloaks as if they had presented themselves by accident. "I came to talk. My men came to watch me do it in style." Jory's fingers tightened and loosened on his sword's grip. "My lord," he said under his breath. Ned dismounted with a care he didn't feel, knees aching as the cobbles took him. He stood squarely to Jaime. "You came to talk. So talk." The lion's smile sharpened. "Very well. Your lady committed a crime. Return my brother and apologize, and I will persuade my father to consider the insult satisfied. Refuse, and I will take something from you, here and now, to balance the scales." Ned thought again of balances, of a boy with hair the wrong color sitting a throne made of stolen swords. He watched Jaime's eyes, the filled with pleasure eyes of a born duelist who had never been made to count the cost of his victories. He heard far behind the alleys a peddler's bell and a woman singing badly as she hauled water from a well. He wanted to say, "I know what you did to my son." He wanted to say, "I know what you did to the realm when you opened a door for a mad king and then shut it in his blood." Instead he said, "You will not touch my men. You will not touch me. If you think otherwise, draw." There are moments when a realm changes its road. They never look like what they are while you are in them. This one looked like an afternoon stale with heat and gull shrieks, and it sounded like the quiet Jaime made when he drew steel. Jory moved first because he loved his lord more than his life, and because Jaime's gaze had flicked toward Ned's sword hand not from need but from habit. The red cloaks came like a wave from both sides, and Ned's men took the first step back, the half-stumble that a cobblestone forces on a foot before it finds its grip. "With me!" Jory shouted, and the brightest thing in the yard was not the lion's hair but Jory Castle's blade as it met a halberd and skated off to bite collarbone. A Lannister man fell gagging. Another lunged, and Jory's teeth showed in that smile he wore when he was fully awake to danger. And then Jaime was there. It was not gallant the way he moved. It was practiced. He caught Jory's sword with a riposte so neat it might have been a courtier's bow and slid under the counterstroke as if Jory's blade were water and his body a fish. The first thrust struck at the seam of Jory's gorget. Jory turned it with a jerk and a grunt. The second thrust went for the eye with a speed that seemed almost lazy until it landed. Jory's shout was a wet animal sound clipped off mid-cry. He went down in a folding of knees and boots, and the world tightened to a ring of iron. Ned did not remember stepping forward, only that the distance closed because Jaime wanted it to close. Steel met steel and scraped so close to his fingers that the bones in his right hand sang. The lion was beautiful at the sword. Ned could grant him that even while he hated the man, the way one hates the wind when it takes a roof. He did not match beauty to beauty. He matched it with the weight of long winters and the rhythms of training yard work, block and cut, the kind of fighting that keeps men alive by humbling their pride. "Come now, my lord," Jaime said softly. "You didn't expect to win today." "I didn't come to lose," Ned said, and sank his shoulder to drive Jaime back over uneven stones slicked by spilled wine. The fight expanded and shrank as the press of men shifted. Ned saw for a blink the pale face of a boy of his household retching against a wall and a red cloak's boot grinding his wrist. He saw a Lannister man he did not know bite at a knife that had pinned his hand through to a linen-stuffed barrel. He saw the gleam of Jory's hair in the dirt and almost lost himself. Jaime's sword came whistling for his skull. He ducked and heard the music of steel ringing over a door lintel. Splinters rained down. Then something happened that happens in brawls more often than ballads admit. A Lannister man each, to honor the gold he'd be paid, sought to help his lord by striking over Jaime's shoulder at Ned's exposed ribs. The angle was wrong. The blade bit Jaime's pauldron and glanced, not deeply, but enough to jerk his balance as he turned to curse. In that heartbeat, the ground itself assisted Eddard Stark. The cobble under Jaime's rear foot was not where he thought it was. He slid a bare inch, just enough that his weight hung, uncommitted, over the hollow of the step. Ned's sword was already moving. He did not think. He did not consider that this man was the Queen's twin, that he was sworn to a white brotherhood, that by law his life was worth more trouble than a small village. He only saw the opening that comes twice in a fight, at the beginning if you misjudge, at the end if the gods are merciful. He drove forward. The point went under the jaw, breaking through flesh and the thin shell of cartilage that keeps a man's throat dry. The force behind the blow ran up Ned's arms. He felt it in his injured knee, in his back. Jaime went from golden to gray like a coin left in brine. He made a small, bewildered sound and half a laugh. Blood spilled out of him, bright, and then darkening as it met the dirt. He took a step as if he meant to kneel and discovered there was no world left built for him to kneel upon. He folded, one hand still obedient enough to try for his throat, as if he could press his life back in with fingers. The red cloaks did what men do when the center is removed from them. Some screamed and charged mindless. Some dropped weapons as if they had burned their palms. One of them let out a roar and leapt, and Ned's mind, turned foolish by the slaughter, registered the man's ear was notched as a dog's. And then the world punched him below the hip where a spearhead came up with ugly speed from low right. He twisted. The thrust glanced between greave and cuisse, tearing flesh. His leg sparked. He staggered. Someone, Varley, took the spearman in the kidney from behind and left him on his knees, hands white around the shaft. "Back to the tower," someone shouted. "For the king. Back." There was no king here, only Law dressed up like a man somewhere far away in a hunting cloak. Ned put a hand to the spear cut. It came away red. He was upright because he did not yet know how not to be. He looked down at Jaime Lannister. There were moments one could not shape a thing to be good, only less evil than its alternatives. Ned knelt, felt the heat of the man's life on his hand. He would have said a word for him, a merciful word, if he had had one. He had nothing to give. He rose, and Jory lay where he lay at the edge of the cheap wine's purple stain, and Ned wanted to pick him up and carry him to Winterfell himself, mile by mile. The gold cloaks arrived late, in the manner of powers that prefer to see which way the wind will blow before setting their sails. Janos Slint pushed his way, shouting, puffing cheeks and pointing at nothing. He took one look at the lion collapsed on the cobbles and lost color but not composure. He began barking orders as if the orders were to himself. The red cloaks pulled back by instinct to form around the body. Ned's men grouped like wolves with blood in their fur. Everything quivered on a knife's edge. A gull screamed. "By the king's law," Slint managed. "Lay down." "The king's hand," Ned said, and his voice came calm from a place more iron than flesh. has been attacked in the street by the Queen's kin and guards. My man is dead. The Kingslayer is dead. There will be no more dead today, not by your slowness or by your eagerness. Have your watch clear the street and escort us to the tower. Send word to the small council that I will attend them when I have washed and put my dead in honor. Slint's eyes flicked from the wolf pin at Ned's collar to the red wound at his thigh to the glittering ruin of Lannister gold darkened by blood. Power is a creature that recognizes its own. At last he nodded, not in obedience, not yet, but in calculation, and began to throw his voice about. The street loosened. The watch set pikes to separate the packs. The red cloaks lifted Jaime as carefully as if he could complain. He did not. One of them sobbed without shame. As they limped away toward the Tower of the Hand, Ned passed Littlefinger where he had not seen him before, standing in a doorway as if he had remembered an errand here at the last possible odd moment. Peter Baelish looked at the body going the other way and covered his mouth as if he stifled a cough or a smile. Then his eyes found the blood on Ned's leg and grew very soft. "My lord," he murmured, "you bleed. Find me a basin and clean linen," Ned said and moved past. He did not want to speak to that man with Jory's blood still wet on the stones behind him. Varys came faster. The eunuch's slippers made no sound on the stair up to Ned's solar, but his breath did. It was quickened, though his face showed nothing but sorrow as delicate as a veil. "Oh, my poor lord," he said as if gravity had chosen this day to begin working more strongly on the world. "What have we done? Kept the king's law?" Ned said through his teeth as a boy poured wine over the cut at his thigh. It burned up his spine and back down. He held the edge of the table. "Where is the king?" "Hunting, alas. The couriers sent to him mid-morning have not returned. Word will reach him by dusk, I think." Varys folded his hands. "The queen is at Maegor's." He paused. "She knows. Of course she knows." Ned breathed. The room smelled of boiled linen and beeswax. "Does she move against me?" "Not yet," Varys said, but his gaze floated to the window as if he could see the red keep through stone. "Grief is a kind of movement." Ned closed his eyes and saw Catelyn taking Tyrion by the sleeve at the Crossroads Inn, the way the music had gone out of the room when she named each man and house that would lend her aid. He saw a boy falling through air he could not forgive. He saw Jaime Lannister's last surprise at the sensation of death. He opened his eyes because to keep them closed was to do nothing when something had to be done. "Send ravens," he said, and the steward in the doorway jumped because the hand's voice, when it hardened, had a kind of winter to it. "One to Lord Stannis at Dragonstone, to come with all speed and claim what is his by right. One to Winterfell, to rob, no, to my lady and my son both, setting out what has happened and ordering the household to readiness. One to Riverrun, warning them what Tywin Lannister will do when he finishes his mourning. And to the Eyrie, my lady wife must tell me if the dwarf lives. If he has rights, let him have them. If he wins them, let him go. It matters now only that word run ahead of the sword." "Of course, my lord." Varys inclined himself. "And to the city watch? Captain Slint will have his letter." Ned saw Jory's phantom at the door, and for a moment everything inside him tried to break at once. He held it together the way he had always held things together, by not permitting any crack to widen. "He is to attend me tonight. I want a list of the watch's captains by name, the numbers at each post, and what gold they receive and from whom. If there are bribes, I prefer them confessed to me rather than discovered by me." "As you say," Varys breathed. His smile was thin as silver leaf. "An inventory of loyalties is always a wise thing to order." Cersei waited for her grief alone. She dismissed Pycelle with a look when his droning reached that tender place where keening might begin without her permission. She waved away her women when they laid out black silk and offered comfort before it could be earned. She sent away Joffrey when he came swaggering, loud and hungry for some lesson that would teach him how men do. Myrcella she kissed and told a story about a lady who became a queen because she had remembered that queens do not cry. Tommen she held until his breath slowed. Then she locked the door and pressed her hands so hard into the edge of the washstand that the petals engraved there bruised her skin. He had teased her that morning about a boy at court whose hair sat wrong on his head. He had called the boy a boiled turnip and made her laugh. The laugh returned now, the way a cut will return when you wash in water that is too cold, and then it was a sound with knuckles inside it. She pressed her forehead to the cool stone and let it come out and go, a thing with claws, until at last there was only breath left. When she turned, her face was the face she had won at 15 and kept polished for decades. She sat and folded her hands and allowed the queen into her. When Varys came with his bow dipped in sorrow like a handkerchief in perfume, she spoke softly and listened to his tide of words until she reached the question she had been walking toward since Jaime fell. "Where is the king?" Varys told her. She smiled a thin line. "When he returns, he will roar and pound the table. Then he will go hunting again, because he hunts whenever he does not wish to govern. The hand will creep in with ink on his fingers and set a word upon the world that will be harder to lift than iron. He will try to name my children bastards." The word made her tongue want to curl, not from shame but from the delight of seeing the shape of the battle. "He will make the old man at Dragonstone king in all but name. Tell me, Lord Varys, how hard would it be to ensure my lord husband's hunt is braver than he intends?" Varys opened his hands, those soft, readable hands, and let the air between them be neutrality. "My queen, I cannot." She held up a finger. "You cannot bloody your own hands. I do not ask you to. Send me my cousin, the eager one, Lancel." Varys inclined his head. "As you wish. And send me the Lord of Coins," she added as if an afterthought. "I will require the watch to watch properly. Men see the world cleanest when their purses are heavy." By twilight the city had the feeling of an animal holding its breath. News ran faster than any man. Corner sellers knew before the Tower of the Hand knew before the September knew. In the kitchens of Maegor's Holdfast, there was laughter too loud and too tender, and then silence where the laughter had been. In the Street of Silk, whores put on red ribbons because men asked for them. In the armory at the tower, Tomard counted arrows 3 times and told a boy to count them a 4th. Sansa asked why Jory had not come to escort her to the hall for supper. Arya said she was not hungry and that eating made you slow anyway. Septa Mordain prayed in a whisper. The gods can hear whispers. Ned sat with the map spread, the wine untouched. Pain came steadily from the wound in his leg. That was good. Pain meant living. Pausing might mean not moving quickly enough. He traced lines with his forefinger from the city to the Trident to Riverrun and up the King's Road to Winterfell. He traced lines on his own heart. Honor on one side, dragons on the other. Between them, the realm's ragged seam. Renly came like a man who believes good posture is a kind of argument all by itself. He looked very young to Ned all of a sudden. Or perhaps Ned had aged today as some men do over winters. "You killed him," Renly said without greeting. He was not condemning. He was counting chips on a table. "Half the court says you murdered him. The other half says he earned it in the street like a mummer who forgets his line." "There are no halves in murder," Ned said. "He died in a fight he picked. He thought the city was his tilt yard." Renly came to the table. He laid a hand exactly on the spot where King's Landing looked like a spider crouched by the river. "It will be worse at dawn. Tywin's banners will rise like wheat everywhere he has fields. The queen will empty the treasury. The watch will look for the heaviest purse. The king will return and shout, and then he will do whatever he does that isn't ruly. No, if you want to live long enough to do what you think is right, you must act before the queen acts. Take her children into custody now. Leave Joffrey the dignity of rooms in Maegor's. Do it with the watch sworn to you. Do it with me. I can give you storm lords at your back by sunrise if you say yes now." Ned's hand flattened over the north. "They are children. So was I when I watched my brother take a city by storm," Renly said with a brightness that failed to hide what flapped under it. "We are all children until men like you decide what the world will be. Keep them safe under lock, and later you can open the lock again and say it was mercy. If you do not lock it now, you will die before you get the chance." Ned looked up and saw Robert at a campfire years ago, meat fat dripping down his chin. promising to be the kind of king who made the realm forget it had ever had a madman for a master. He saw Stannis, stern and correct, a man of book-straight rules and iron-hard edges. He saw the boys whose hair was wrong, sitting at a table where they had been taught to hold knives the way a dancer holds fans. He saw Jory. The room wavered the way air does over a hot road. Then it steadied. "Bring me the commander of the watch," he said. "We will secure the Red Keep and the halls within it. My daughters will be guarded. The queen's children will be respectfully confined. The king will be brought to me as soon as he returns, and I will put the truth in his hands while he is still strong enough to hold it." Renly exhaled like a man who had been holding his own counsel too long. "Good." His smile flashed. "I will have men in the tiled courtyard before the moon sets. Do not stand alone again, Lord Stark." Tyrion had learned that the Vale of Arryn made beasts of men and children of lords, but it was not the Vale's fault. It was the way mountains bit into a man's sense of proportion. He had also learned that a Sel's word who will stand for you once will stand for you again if you stand him another chance to live. Bronn moved like a cat who had found the only patch of sunlight in a cold room and decided to own it. They had left the Eyrie by night. The air had new edges to it beside the chasm where the Sky Road misnamed itself. It made Tyrion feel very clear. Each step was chosen and then taken, and if you wanted to be anywhere other than falling, you did both with attention. Contrast has a way of teaching a man what he is interested in keeping. His life, the fingers he uses to hold goblets, the way laughter feels when it comes in a burst from his belly. He had laughed when Bronn's sword sent Ser Vardis past the point where honor remembers names. He had laughed because it had been very close for a while, and he had wondered whether Jaime would be angry when he heard that the imp had taken breath a few days more. On the third day down, a hawk found them. The creature had no letter. It had news built into its manner. The way it wheeled and wheeled said the valley was full of words. They came to a steading where the milk was sour and the bread flat, and the farmer's wife told them more than they asked because she was giddy with the fact that hard things happen to lords, too. "The Kingslayer's dead," she said as she ladled stew into bowls with meat in it that did not want to be identified. "Killed by the hand in the city. Killed like a common man on a common street." Tyrion's mouth opened and closed and then opened for the stew so he would have an excuse not to speak. Jaime had joked his way through everything since they were boys. He had called the world's bluff and always found it a bluff. Tyrion had believed there would be exceptions until there weren't. He put the bowl down very carefully and stood in the doorway to the dark. The mountain was there like a hand on his chest. He wanted to weep and did not because the tears would feel like a lie. He did the next true thing instead. "Take me to my father," he told Bronn. "Every turn we can cut off the road, we cut. Every man who wants coin to look the other way, we buy. I will not go to King's Landing. I would drown between that queen and that hand, and not even the cats would remember where. My father will use me now if he ever will." He tried to make it a jest. It did not come out a jest. The family is short of sons. Tywin received the news with his back to the messenger. He stood looking down into a basin where boys had dyed water red with crushed madder root to show him where the trident lay and how it forked. He liked devices that simplified the world so it could be dominated. When the boy finished stammering, Tywin turned his head by inches, as if he were giving Pain very strict permission to enter his house. "Who killed him?" he asked. "The hand," the boy said. "Lord Eddard Stark, my lord." Tywin looked at the red basin and saw old things reflected there. Fish banners and laughing men, a stag hammering its will into the city, a mad king's shriek cut off by a blade so quick even sound tripped over itself and fell. He saw his wife's hand withdrawing from his hand in a room where a baby's cry had stopped very suddenly. He looked up as Kevin shifted behind him, trying to find the right way to breathe. "Send word to every steward and every smith," Tywin said, "that the lion does not mourn as other creatures mourn. He feeds. He feeds until it is quiet again." Kevin waited. He knew when to wait. Tywin dipped his fingers into the red and lifted them, and the drops stood at the very point of falling. "You will assemble the host at the Golden Tooth. Adam will take the vanguard and begin unseating Tully's banners wherever they are nailed. I want the Riverlands on fire by fortnight's end so that every sob in Riverrun rides down Edmure Tully's throat and chokes him. Send ravens to the Westermen we can trust with more than a plow. I want every levy at sword practice by sunrise. And send to the city. There are men there who like gold more than. They like laws. Find them. We will not fight the Stark with one army. We will fight him with 10. And Tyrion? Kevin asked. Send word to the Eyrie if you must, though I suspect you will find him halfway down a mountain already, Tywin said, and the drops released themselves from his hand and fell back into the red. Tell him to come to my camp. He will be useful to me now, whether he likes it or not. Robert came back to the city with mud on his boots and wild boar blood on his sleeve because he had insisted on gutting the beast himself while the dogs howled. He came laughing because he did not know any other speed for his voice when the sun was on him. He came drinking because it was easier than choosing. He came furious because fury felt so much like being alive still. He came to find a quiet he had not earned. Men would not meet his eye. The lion's dead, he was told. And his laugh cut off not because he was shocked, but because he was tired of the world outpacing his attention. You have been away, Ned said when at last they were behind a door together, and his voice held no blame because what point is there in blaming a man for his nature? And so things have happened while you were away. Things, Robert said, and tore off his glove with his teeth. Always things. He smelled of horse and leaf mold and that same iron he had carried in his blood since he was a boy. You killed him. He tried to kill me, Ned said. He killed my man. He sought to take me in the street. He would not be reasoned with. He did not flinch. He did not expect thanks. Robert stripped a bracer and threw it. It hit the carved chair and fell. God's balls, Ned, you and the lion both. Could no one wait to shed blood until I'd had time to piss? He stalked to the window and leaned his head against the cool stone as if he could drain the heat out of it. For a moment he was quiet. When he turned, the humor in him had burned away to something heavier. There's more. Tell me. Ned set the book of lineages on the table. Not the one for show with gilt on the edges, but the real one, swollen where damp had once got into it, with names written out in a careful hand over generations. He laid beside it a lock of black hair bound with linen thread and a report from a smith who had been too honest to lie and too frightened to sleep after telling the truth. He put all his small discoveries on the wood because men like Robert needed to see what they were to believe. There is a pattern, Ned said, and took him through it gently. Not because he doubted Robert's wit, but because he respected the truth enough to present it plainly. Your children with the queen are not yours. They are born of her and of her brother. They have the lion's seed in them and not the stag's. I am sorry. Robert drank as if the cup would go to war with him and deserved to be beaten into submission. He set it down. He looked not at the table but through it, as if the wood were a shallow stream he could ford and then be done with. Some men break loudly. Robert broke in the manner of a beam that had borne too much weight too long. It did not crack so much as sigh. And yet I loved them, he said, so quietly Ned had to lean in. Not the way a careful father loves, but I loved them in my fashion. I loved the idea of them, which is worse, I suppose. And I loved the woman once, which is worst of all. The laugh that came was foul. I love everything that kills me a little. You will do what is right, Ned said, because he would not let his friend sit down in the mud of self-contempt and call it a camp. You always meant to. Robert stared at the line of ink that proved what both of them hated to see. Then he put a hand to the paper, not to crush it, but like a man who puts his hand on the shoulder of another before giving a command that will cost them both. Stannis, he said, and the name was Iron Nails in Oak. It's Stannis by law, and for once I'll keep the law, because the law is the only shield I have left that doesn't leak. He looked up and met Ned's gaze the way old friends do when nothing stays between them. You will hold the realm until he comes. Write it down. I will sign the damn thing before I go on another hunt and get so drunk I forget what my own name is. He hunted 2 days later because he needed to pound the ground with horses and hear dogs bay so he would not hear himself think. Lancel poured for him. Cersei came to see him off and kissed his cheek with the softness of a girl too late to save. When they brought him back on a litter, the bite of the boar was ugly as a mouth across his belly, and the strong wine had made a garden in his head where every path led to sleep. He was not so far gone that he could not speak when Ned pressed the paper into his hand and guided the pen and watched the fingers scrawl Robert Baratheon in a hand that had won battles the pen could not imagine. "Stannis," Robert whispered. "Hold it for Stannis. Keep them safe." The them was indistinct. It might have been the realm. It might have been every child who looked too much like his mother. It might have been the wolves he had not seen in too long. Cersei watched the signature as if it were a veil that could be lifted with a sharp enough fingernail. She held Joffrey's hand too tightly for a boy who thought himself a man. When she left the room, her face did not crack. Ned did what he had said he would do. He took the Red Keep without blood by moving only men who did not want to bleed. He went first to his daughters and put them in rooms with thick walls and men at the door whose loyalty did not come out of the treasury. He sent Ser Barristan to speak to the other White Cloaks, not as their commander but as a man whose honor smelled like something the old gods might burn on their altars. "The king is dying," Ned told them when they gathered in a chamber whose windows showed only sea. "He has named his heir in clean ink with his good hand, and I will not see a child set ahead of a man because his mother wants it so." Boros Blunt puffed. Meryn Trant blinked slowly as if the words were fish he had to spear one by one. Ares Oakheart, young in the particular way young knights are, full to the brim with rules he had not yet been tempted to break, nodded jerkily. Barristan never took his eyes from Ned's face. "The King's Guard protects the king," Barristan said, as if he were being asked whether snow fell in winter. "We will protect the king when there is a king. Until then, we take our example from the hand who holds the realm on the king's command." He leaned forward, a man bearing his whole history in each movement and not asking for forgiveness for any of it. "Swear it by the seven if that comforts you. For my part, I will swear by the memory of my failures. I will not add to them today." They swore, some loudly and some as if their own voices embarrassed them. Ned breathed and felt something in him loosen that had been clenched since Winterfell. The throne room had watched men for 300 years and learned how to judge them. It watched now as Ned approached with the paper in his hand and the weight of the city on his back. The gold cloaks lined the route. Their pikes were oiled. Their boots were clean. Janos Slint's eyes were very bright. He had come to Ned the night before and read the command naming him the King's Man until Stannis came. He had held it upside down and then the right side up and nodded so hard you could hear the joints in his neck click. Littlefinger had been there earlier and had smiled as if he were relieved to be left out of this. Men who enjoy games sometimes prefer to watch one played that they did not set the rules for. Cersei stood with Joffrey and the other children and a shadow like rage but colder behind her eyes. She wore green. Ned thought of the wolf hunting in summer wheat. "Lord Stark," she said, and her voice did not quiver. "Does it comfort you to drag the kingdom through a clerk's scratching when a true king needs no ink to be obeyed?" Ned lifted the paper. "It comforts me to see a realm held together by more than one woman's will." He handed it to Barristan and spoke loudly enough for the rafters. "By command of King Robert Baratheon, we proclaim Lord Stannis Baratheon, his eldest brother, as heir to the Iron Throne and protector of the realm. Until he comes, the hand will act in the king's name. The king's children will be housed and guarded with every courtesy and care." He paused because one must pause to let words sit down where they land. "This is the law." Joffrey, who had been practicing his chin in a mirror since he could walk, thrust it out as if it could deflect arrows. "I am the king." Barristan's eyes slid to the boy and then to Cersei's hand and then back to the paper. "You are the queen's son," he said gently. "You will be honored as such until Lord Stannis comes. His Grace Robert he has spoken." The last came out rough, as if he had to push it past something that did not want to allow it. Cersei had imagined 100 ways this would go. She had invited the watch captain to each of them. She had gold in Slint's purse and his habits in her pocket, and the quiet men behind her prepared to turn a ceremony into a lesson. She had not expected Barristan's steadying, nor Renly's stormlords in the western gallery where they looked like shadows until they moved. Neither had she expected the way the hand of her grief would open and close around her throat at odd moments. Came now. She smiled through it. Janos Slint had killed men for less money than this. He had also lived long enough to know the difference between a river in spate and a flood that would carve a new bed. He met Ned Stark's gaze and found there the same thing he had found in his own mother's eyes when she had told him to stop begging from neighbors and take up a cudgel instead. It wasn't sentiment. It was the pure line of decision. Slint turned to his men. "Lower pikes," he said. They lowered them, clacking in unison as sticks in a child's game. "We serve the hand until the new king comes. His orders are law." Ned felt the exhalation travel down the hall. It touched him. He did not let it change his face. Renly smiled in public for the first time in 2 days. Cersei did not move for so long that those who know battle began to worry, because stillness is a strategy too. Then she took Joffrey's hand the way a mother takes a child into a crowd, and the courtiers flowed aside to let them past. She paused just long enough to speak to Ned in a voice meant for the distance between two faces. "This is not finished." "It never is," Ned said, and in that moment he felt older than he had at any time since a boy had asked him once what words he would have on a tomb if you could choose them. He had said, "Then rest." It had been a child's answer to a child's question. They put Robert in a stone he would have hated and covered him with cloth he would have ruined. They closed the doors on the smell of herbs and the soft murmuring of Pycelle's prayers. The city woke as from a night terror, sweating and convinced something had happened somewhere an arm's length beyond understanding. Boats moved on the river like thoughts no one could quite form. The Red Keep settled into new pathways. Messengers learned new routes with their feet. The ravens had already gone. To Dragonstone with their nervous flight like quickened hearts. To Riverrun where Catelyn read with her mouth set and then let the paper tumble to her lap as if she could drop the fate it described. To Winterfell where Robb stood with the letter and the wind off the wall finding him even here and cooling the heat that had risen in him with each line. "Mother," he said very calmly, "we call the banners." Catelyn had not slept. "We call the banners," she said. Not because she was eager, but because she had learned that grief and prudence can occupy the same spa.
Soina woman.
"And we write to your father. And we write to the phrase because we will need the river." At Riverrun, Edmure listened to the messengers from villages with names he had not cared to learn when names were only names. Now they were places where smoke rose, and around the smoke men and women and children ran like ants from a stick poked into a mound for someone's amusement. The mountain had begun his dark harvest, riding from hamlet to hamlet, taking food that had not been grown for him and lives that were in his way and leaving signs of himself like a rude man leaves his smell. Edmure slammed his first into wood as if his arm could feel anything through oak. He looked at Brynden Tully, who had never looked away from a hard thing in his life, and found a steady place to stand. "We hold," he said, "and we send for my sister's son. If the lion is coming, he will not take what is ours without a price that makes him think twice the next time he wants a thing that isn't his." At Dragonstone, Stannis Baratheon read the letter with a face that did not seem to contain more expressions than a knife, and then he folded it so precisely that you could have drawn lines on his bones with that letter and found them straight. "At last," he said, and then because he was a precise man and the world was imprecise, he added, "At last someone keeps the law." He looked at Davos Seaworth as if Davos were part of the law, which was not far from how Davos felt about Stannis. "We sail. I can have the fleet ready," Davos said. He had been ready since the day Lord Stannis had been sent to Dragonstone, as if exile were a kind of promotion. "But the storms. The storms are not in command here," Stannis said. "I am." His mouth twitched and then settled. "We will go to King's Landing and set the realm to rights. If you think the storms will oppose me, smuggle them." Davos smiled in that small way that belonged to him alone. "Aye, my lord," he said. "I'll wrap the sea in cloth and carry it past the sentries if you ask it." When Stannis came into the city, he found it nothing like the tales. He had watched its fire from across the Trident years ago. He had counted the torches and decided how many barrels of grain would feed how many men for how many days. He had found math in war and held to it when the songs tried to make it all gold and glory. The city smelled like human life, waste and birth and bread and blood. It smelled like a thing that would keep living after you had left it alone. He did not dislike it, he did not enjoy it. He recognized it the way a soldier recognizes a road, with respect and a frank lack of romance. Ned met him at the gate because to do less would have been discourteous, and if the realm were to be saved, it would be saved by courtesies that were not empty. They stood together under the shadow of the Great Wall and looked at each other for a long moment in which both measured and both were measured. "My lord," Ned said, and bowed enough to acknowledge that the world had changed. "The realm is yours by law. I have held it as I said I would. I have not hanged a child. I do not intend to." Stannis's mouth tightened. "I would not ask you to hang a child," he said, and that was truth, even if it sat next to a different truth. That he would do many things others called cruel to keep the law from bleeding out. "We will have justice for the crimes that made this mess. We will have it without spectacle." "The Queen has left the city," Ned said. Varys had arranged it the way a man arranges a vase on a mantle, precisely, and with a sense of how the room should look afterward. He had allowed Cersei to slip out at dusk with no children and no gold heavy enough to clank. She had left behind a son who thought himself a king and a daughter who cried into Sansa Stark's sleeve and a plump boy who had been taught not to be in the way. She rides west with a small escort. She will go to her father as all wounded things do. "We will take ahead when we take the father," Stannis said. "Not before. There will be no rumors to grow fat in the alleys." "Where are the children?" "In Maegor's," Ned said. "Under guard. Treated well. Sansa sits with the girl. Arya would not sit. She stands, which is her way. The boy is angry. He will be angrier when he understands what anger is." "Good," Stannis said shortly. "He can learn." "I did." Tyrion came into the west like a man walking into a forge and knowing that if he is not careful he will be shaped. Tywin's camp stretched where the green fork bit into the land, bright pavilions like accusations against the sky. He dismounted near his father's tent, and the Lannister men looked at him with surprise that did not quite reach contempt. They had been told he mattered now. That knowledge sat awkwardly on them. Tywin received him with a look that had always seemed to Tyrion more dangerous than any drawn sword. It did not promise violence. Promised calculation. Tyrion told him about the Vale, about the mountain roads, about the woman with a screaming child and milk dried to chalk, about the way Bronn fought like a man keeping a secret between himself and the next minute. He told him, at last, about Jaime, because not to tell would have been to accept a different sort of judgment than his father had to render. Tywin poured wine as if it were oil and the fire needed tending. "You will go to King's Landing," he said, as if he were remarking on the weather. "You will pick apart that Stark's arrangements and find the loose threads. You will pull them. You will make the watch look somewhere else while we do what needs doing. You will be my voice where my voice cannot be heard. You will do it because there is no one else whose tongue is sharp enough and whose ambition is not tied to his height." Tyrion laughed once, because laughing was how he had always met the world when it dared to tell him what his size was. Then he nodded. "And if I do this and live, H. "And you will have done this and lived," Tywin said. His eyes, which were coins minted before Tyrion had been, did not change. "What happens next will depend on what you have made possible. Do not come to me for promises, boy. I have had enough of men who want harvests guaranteed." The war's first rush ran ahead of itself as wars do, clattering hooves and the crackle of burning thatch and old women shouting names into smoke. But the realm did not break cleanly along one line. Instead it splintered, because that is how men are. Mace Tyrell, who had waited his whole life for a son of House Tyrell to be placed where all could admire him, found himself courted by letters with particular perfumes. One, green-inked and deliberate, asked him to support the law and a king who would reward steadiness with trust. The other letters asked him to avenge a brother, Renly, whose death had not happened yet but would be written in his eyes the moment he chose to love him too publicly. For now, Mace answered no one with words. He answered his steward with a list of supplies and a date for a muster. Loras sharpened his spear and sharpened his grief in advance like a knife. Renly did not wait for grief. He ran toward a shape of crown that had been shimmering in front of him since he first realized men liked him for being the best version of things they were not. He left the city at dawn with the Knight of Flowers at his side and a dozen lords who had convinced themselves that banner color could settle law if they waved it vigorously enough. "You won't hold him," Ned told Stannis as he watched the dust of Renly's departure drift. "You can beat him. That is not the same." "I will do what the law requires," Stannis said, "and if he sets himself against it, I will put him down." He did not say the thing that was sitting in the back of his mind and chewing, that there was more than one enemy and that to fight them one at a time would be to lose sand from a bag with too many holes. He had Melisandre's eyes on him even when she was not in the room. He felt her certainty the way a man feels the sun at his back through a thin shirt. He did not bring her out for show because he did not need to. He brought her because he believed in winning. Ned watched the Red Woman as men watch flames, wary of sparks. She did not flinch before his gaze or anyone's. She bent over maps with Stannis and spoke in a low voice that made lords bristle and then listen against their will. "The law is ash," she said once when they were alone. "Without the fire that makes men fear breaking it. The law is what keeps us men at all," Ned said. "Fear will do for a day. Law is for tomorrow." She smiled as if he had said something charming at a feast. "Then let us have both," she whispered and turned back to Stannis. Robb marched because he had to. The host of the North was not like the hosts of the South. It moved with a rhythm learned from snow and herds. The long days, the long lines, the way men told stories at the fires because it was the only way to see across the dark. He came to the twins with banners rushing in wind, and Hoster Tully's need braided to his own until the knot could not be pulled apart without cutting. He found Lord Walder in a hall that smelled of onion and old linen. He agreed to what his mother advised because it was wise. Marriage in exchange for a river that would not deny him. He left with the river under him and a debt owed that would not choke him later because he meant to pay it. He did not plan to fall in love at the wrong moment. He had not yet been introduced to that particular charm. At the Whispering Wood, there was no Jaime to catch in a net of trees. There was Adam Marbrand with his horsemen, and there was the sound of a boy's heart beating in his chest as loudly as banners pop in a good wind. Robb learned that the world turns on moments when men he had trusted would go where he pointed and not ask if he was right. He learned that he was right enough. They took Adam and half his best riders with ropes that sang and the night to help them. The old songs at the fires afterward were not about Jaime. They were about wolves that had learned the feel of southern leaves under their paws and the taste of pride in their mouths. Edmure held at Riverrun long enough to see the river gilded by dawn after a night of torches and arrows where every shaft you loosed felt like you were putting a thought into the enemy's head and hoping it was a bad one. The mountain rode away because the mountain rode away when he had taken what he wanted from a place. Tywin drew his host to Harrenhal not because he loved its black stones, but because he loved what they said to men about power, ruin, and permanence in one ugly shape. He sent raiding parties and fingers that poked and then balled into fists, testing where the North would bruise. He told himself it was a hunt and not a war, and then laughed without humor when he realized Hunt's End and this would not. Tyrion came into King's Landing wearing plain cloth and a look that said he had lost something he had not yet figured out how to replace. He went straight to the Tower of the Hand because he had never avoided it in his mind even when circumstances had allowed him to pretend he could. He and Ned looked at each other the way two men look at a narrow bridge when they must cross it together to reach what they cannot bear to think they both want. "You should hang me," Tyrion said at once, because it was better to open with a jest told from very high up over a valley than a plea told at knee height. It would simplify things. You could blame my father. My father could deny it. The realm would call you cruel and then forgive you because you are honorable. We all go to sleep feeling we have done what we do when we cannot do better. I do not hang men for being their father's sons," Ned said. "We will talk. You will tell me what your father will do next. I will not trust you. You will know. Trust me. Between us, we may build something that does not fall tomorrow. It is not better than that." Tyrion grinned. "It's not worse." He looked out the window toward the river, which was carrying on as if kings and hands and lions and stags were amusements for land animals. "Do you know what I miss?" he asked. "The way my brother could make a room lighter by sneering at it." "I miss my man," Ned said. He did not sneer. He laughed like a good hearth. "I will not make bargains in his name, but I will win something with his death if I can." They built a language between them that was not friendship and not enmity. It consisted of accurate information traded at fair prices. Joffrey learned that sulking does not change the course of a river. Sansa learned to sit still and not be trapped by stillness. Arya learned to slip through the Red Keep's veins like blood. Stannis learned what the city does to a man's patience. Renly learned what a camp does to a dream when it expands faster than purpose. The Tyrells learned the taste of waiting. The Freys learned the size of a debt. And then the shadow that had been standing behind Renly all his life stepped close. It wore his brother's face, if faces can be understood as conclusions. It killed him quietly, without blood in a tent, and the bad news went across the fields with the morning mist, and men who had shouted the name of a king at sunset were swallowing it by noon. Loras Tyrell's heart went black with sudden heat. Mace found his answer for the letters. He sent ravens not to King's Landing but to Tywin, because grief, when dressed in banners, sometimes prefers fathers who promise victories over lawful kings who promise order. They came for the city with gold and green, the Lannister lion beside the Tyrell rose, and there was a moment when the Blackwater looked as if spring had arrived early and covered it with a new color. Stannis stood on the wall with Davos at his shoulder. Ned stood there, too, because he could not ask men to hold a gate he would not hold. They had not had time to study alchemists and chains. They had had time to sink hulks in the channel and lay firepots under the eaves and make the kind of maps that do not lie because you are building them with your feet. They had time to speak to the men. Ned told them that the realm was a field, and if it were trampled enough, there would be no grain for their children's bread. Stannis told them that the law was a wall, and if it broke here, there would be no shelter when the real winter comes. Davos told them a joke because sometimes laughter is mortar between stones, and the men laughed and then went quiet like men do when they have decided to die if they have to, and in deciding it have decided not to. The battle was not songs, though songs were born from it the way children are born from rough nights. The Tyrell fleet had cooks who had never been more than a day from fresh milk. They vomited when the river burned. The Lannister captain who had given orders from a lace-draped chair was very surprised when his chair and ship parted company in the first rush and did not have time to be surprised at anything else. Men from the city pressed shoulder to shoulder on the quay, passing stones to men who needed them a story away. The Hound fought where Joffrey could see him and then where no one could see him and then not at all, which was its own kind of bravery because he came back from the fire rather than lie down in it forever. Tyrion found the alchemists and their stored wildfire and did not build a chain because he could not, but he put clay jars in small boats and set them to drift and shot them just when timing was all that was left to be had. He burned pieces of the river and made other pieces reluctant. He did not save the city. He bought it moments at a price his father would have approved. He fought with an axe because axes do not lie. A thing that is hit with an axe is cut or it is harder than wood. It ended with the Tyrell standard pulling back and the lion-counting men left and deciding he would prefer to count them again next week. The river stank of pitch and other things. The city did not cheer because it had no breath left. Ned stood on the wall with his hand on the stone and looked out at the sunset, which did not care, and remembered Winterfell snow creaking under boots. They hanged 2 men that night for trying to pry rings off a body's fingers while the body was still alive. They nodded to each other when the rope took them because they had known this would be the payment. Stannis wrote a list of men who had been brave and men who had been foolish and men who had been both. He did not sleep. In his tent, he allowed the Red Woman to speak about kings and flames. He answered in short words and did not tell her to leave because he knew she would not. Cersei, in the Rock, listened to Tywin's account of the partial defeat the way a sister listens to a story told by a brother she cannot bear to suspect has begun to die. He did not say be patient. Tywin never said be patient. He said, "We will strike from the west like a second dawn." She smiled and imagined Ned Stark with a rope around his neck and then refused the image because it did not help. She sent a letter to Littlefinger, whose replies always came as if delivered from a dream in which everything could be made to cost a little more and thus be more dear. She sent for Qyburn. She ran her thumb over the scar the ring had left on Robert's lip years ago when he had thought to teach her a lesson. She had learned that the world is a lesson you write yourself. Winter had not come yet. It had sent its heralds, cold mornings, thin light, the way men began to count wood. In the north, Bran Stark was learning to be a lord who could not walk and yet could travel very far. In the Riverlands, Catelyn sat with her father's hand in hers and listened to his breath rattle like wind in lacings. In the Vale, Lisa Arryn stack her fears as neatly as she could into a wall that would eventually fall on her. On Dragonstone, a boy with hair the wrong color practiced with a wooden sword and cried when his tutor struck him for crying. In King's Landing, Sansa wrote letters she was not permitted to send and learned the weight of a hairpin. Arya learned all the names of the men who stood outside her door and how their feet sounded in the hall. Stannis learned the city's moods like a man learns a horse, what spooks it, what feeds it, what makes it bite. Ned learned to compromise, which is to say he learned to choose what he could not bear over what he could not allow. He learned to listen to Tyrion without imagining a rope. He learned to say no to Melisandre without imagining a fire he could not put out. He learned to write to Robb as if his son were already the man he hoped to become. He learned to sit at council table where Pycelle drooled and Littlefinger smiled and Varys spoke softly, and still to leave the room with more than he had carried in. Tywin retreated like a man drawing back his arm to get a better swing. He drew coin from mines until the coin itself began to complain. He sent men who had eaten his bread since boyhood to do tasks they had not thought would be asked. He waited for the Freys to fail their oath because he understood that men who sell crossings sell other things when the price is right. He wrote a letter to Roose Bolton that read like a knife wiped clean after use. He spoke to Kevin of a feast held with salt and meat and the possibility of music you do not notice until it stops. And because the realm never runs out of complications, word came over the sea that a girl with a name too old for her had 3 new names, the names of the creatures who breathe fire in stories and had now learned to do it in the sun. A Dothraki Khalasar was not a concern for winter, but it was a concern for a realm that had forgotten how to think about dragons. Varys smiled to himself in rooms where no one could see him and began at last to lay threads. He had gathered so long, he could not remember the day he had picked the first one up. Always more, Ned said to the gods in the Sept where he knelt late at night with tired knees. He did not ask for ease. He asked only to be pointed toward the door he must use. In the Godswood he had planted at the edge of the city in dirt that once had seen dragons chained. He stood before a weirwood sapling that had not yet learned the faces of men. Its leaves whispered without wind. He closed his eyes and found the snow noise in his mind and used it to quiet the rest. He saw Jory's face and did not shy away. He spoke to it and to a golden face that had been surprised at last. He spoke to his children and to all the children in the city who did not yet know that the world is not big enough to hold every battle they will be asked to watch. What if he had done otherwise? What if he had let Jaime live? There are roads that never get walked. There are roads that do. Ned had chosen one with his sword on a dirty street, and the realm had followed, grumbling and bleeding and laughing and bearing children as realms do. He rose because men like him do not stay on their knees long. He went back to work. On a morning that broke flat and bright, a raven from the twins brought news of a feast and of bannermen gathering at long tables and of a bridge decked like a bride. Robb folded the letter and saw in its neat script the shadow of hunger. He read it to Catelyn, and she listened the way a mother listens when the night has been too long and the day is not done. "Mind your promises," she said, and he nodded. He meant to. In another version of the world, he would have failed. In this one, he put a daughter of Lord Walder on his arm when the snows fell and did not put his hand in the fire where a pretty girl's smile warmed his pride. He did not find out what it felt like to drown in a song half sung. Hope is not a plan, and plans without hope are wicked things. Between them, between Ned's patience and Stannis's law and Tyrion's wit and Davos's stubborn faith in decent men, something like a road appeared through the war. It was not straight. It had mud and thieves. It did not always lead where you thought it would when you began to walk it, but it held. Years later, bards would try to make it gleam. They would fail the way bards do when faced with grit. Better to say this: there was a day when a golden man died in the street. It was not noble. It smelled like spilled wine and fish. It happened because one man slipped and another did not. From that day, other days unfolded like maps that had been kept in a trunk too long. The creases showed. The edges were torn. Men still found their way by them. And at Winterfell, when the snows developed their long memory, a lord with hair going to iron and a scar on his thigh stood in the courtyard and watched his grandson try a blade too long for him and laughed, the sound low and patient, and put his hand over the boy's hands and taught him the weight of steel. He taught him the thing he had learned in a city that was never quiet, a thing that sounds like a prayer but is only the cleanest truth a man can give a child. Hold fast, then decide.